Welcome back everyone to Gotcha Interact. We'll be taking a look at the first half of the 4.8 banners today. The first character we'll be looking at is Navia, and the other character that's sharing a banner with her is Nilou. Let's go through both of these banners and see whether or not these characters are a good pulling option for you.
And if you do enjoy the video, go ahead and like and subscribe and check out the rest of the channel for other videos you may be interested in. We do also have a Discord you can join where we have a lot of members talking with each other and even talking with us. Now, on to the video.
Like we talked about, the first character we're going to be jumping into and talking about is Navia. So looking at her talents and everything, first and foremost, you're going to want to look at her ascension. She ascends into crit damage, allowing you to focus a little bit more into crit rate on her artifacts and substats and whatnot, as well as her weapon is going to be going into crit rate as well. And with how her kit is going to kind of work, you're going to want a higher crit rate when building her. But looking at kind of where she fits in a team, she's going to be an on-field damage dealer, kind of almost quick swappy to an extent. She's going to be using a lot of her skill damage to do a lot of damage that she's going to be doing, with everything else kind of supporting her damage as a crystallized type character. Now, looking at her kit, in her normal and skills, we're going to be talking about that first. Her normal attack isn't necessarily anything that you want to focus on leveling into, but her skill is the biggest thing that you're going to want to level into as a talent. There's nothing crazy that kind of comes in with the normal attacks until we get into some passives later. So looking at the skill Ceremonial Crystal Shot, it states that when a character in the party obtains an elemental shard created from the crystallized reaction, Navia will gain 1 crystal shrapnel stack. Navia can have up to 6 stacks of crystal shrapnel at once, and each time crystal shrapnel gain is triggered, the duration of the crystal shrapnel stacks you already have will be reset. When firing and using the skill, Navia will consume all crystal shrapnel stacks and open her elegant yet lethal gunbrella, firing multiple Rosula shard shots that can penetrate opponents, dealing geo damage to opponents' hit. When 0, 1, 2, or 3 or more stacks of crystal shrapnel are consumed, 5, 7, 9, or 11 Rosula shard shots will be fired respectively. The more Rosula shard shots that strike a single opponent, the greater the damage dealt to that opponent. When all 11 Rosula shard shots strike, 200% of the original amount of damage is then dealt. In addition, when more than 3 stacks of the crystal shrapnel are consumed, every stack above those 3 will increase the damage dealt by this gunbrella attack by an additional 15%, with the max amount of stacks you can have being 6, you can get an extra 45% extra damage on this attack. This also has a hold version as well, and the good thing about having this hold version is it will continually collect nearby elemental shards that is created by those crystallized reactions. And then when released, the Rosula shard shots will have the exact same effect as when it is tapped instead. At C0, you have 2 initial charges of this skill.
With Navia's burst, you're basically just unleashing a massive cannon barrage on opponents, and you're going to deal AoE geo damage over time and providing kind of cannon fire support for a duration. When these cannon attacks hit opponents, Navia will gain 1 stack of crystal shrapnel. This effect can be triggered up to once every 2.4 seconds. Taking a quick look at Navia's passive, her first one is called Undisclosed Distribution Channels. This just states that for 4 seconds after using Ceremonial Crystal Shot or her skill, the damage dealt by Navia's normal attacks, charge attacks, and plunging attacks will be converted into geo damage, which cannot be overridden by any other elemental infusions, and the damage dealt by these will be increased by 40%. Now her second passive is called Mutual Assistance Network. This just states that for each Pyro, Electro, Cryo, or Hydro party member, or basically every element that can be crystallized, Navia will gain 20% increased attack, and this effect does stack up to 2 times.
Now looking at the next character we have on the banner, once again sharing the other side of the banner with Navia is going to be Nilou. Now looking at Nilou, she's going to be focusing heavily on doing a lot of balloon damage, and that is really going to be shown in her kit. Talking about her ascension, she ascends into HP percent, and that is really going to be helpful when looking at the bloom cores. Now her normal attack isn't anything that you're going to necessarily focus into, but her skill is. Looking at her skill, she will enter the pirouette state, dealing hydro damage to nearby opponents based on Nilou's max HP. While she is in this state, Nilou's normal attacks and elemental skill will cause her to enter the sword dance and whirling step stances respectively, causing damage she deals to be converted to hydro damage that cannot be overridden and that is considered elemental skill damage. In these stances, Nilou's third dance step will end pirouette state, and has the following effects based on the type of said dance step. Sword Dance unleashes a luminous illusion that deals hydro damage to opponents it touches and grants Nilou the Lunar Prayer effect. This effect converts Nilou's normal attacks into Sword Dance techniques, and her final hit will unleash a luminous illusion. Looking at Whirling Steps, Nilou unleashes a whirling water wheel that deals AoE hydro damage, and creates a tranquility aura that follows your active character around and applies wet status to opponents within its AoE. Nilou is unable to perform any charge attacks while under the effect of the pirouette or lunar prayer effects. These effects will be removed when she leaves the field.
Nilou's burst is very simple in practice. It's basically just going to deal an AoE Hydro damage hit based on Nilou's max HP, and also going to apply a lingering Aeon effect to all opponents that are hit. Shortly after, just a few seconds, that lingering Aeon will then explode and deal another massive Hydro damage hit. Now, looking into Nilou's passives, this is where it really gets into the nitty-gritty of how Nilou works and just how her kit works. It's all in her first passive. This states that when all characters in the party are all Dendro or Hydro, and there are at least one of each of them in the team, the completion of the third dance step of Nilou's skill will grant all nearby characters the Golden Chalice's bounty for 30 seconds, and this doesn't matter if you do this 3 skills or 3 normal attacks after using the skill. Characters under this effect of Golden Chalice's bounty will increase the elemental mastery of all nearby characters by 100 for 10 seconds whenever they are hit by Dendro attacks. Also, triggering the Bloom reaction will create Bountiful Cores instead of Dendro Cores. These Bountiful Cores are going to burst very quickly after being created, and they have larger AoEs. They also can't trigger Hyper Bloom or Burgeon, and they share an upper numerical limit with Dendro Cores being 5. So once 5 are created, then they'll start blowing up even quicker. Bountiful Core damage is considered damage dealt by Dendro Cores produced by Bloom. Now, should the party not meet these conditions for this passive talent, meaning if you don't have only Dendro and Hydro characters, then you cannot get this Golden Chalice bounty effect, and it'll basically just be cancelled. Looking at her second passive real quick, this just states that every 1,000 points of Nilou's max HP above 30,000 is going to cause the damage dealt by those Bountiful Cores created by the characters affected by that Golden Chalice bounty to increase by 9%, and the maximum damage increase you can get this way is 400%. Guys, with Natlin coming up sooner than you might expect, I have one question for you. How are your savings looking? Lubar is a service that allows you to top up on Genesis crystals for a cheaper price so you can get that last minute grab of that character you've had your eyes set on. It's super easy and 100% safe because Lubar only needs your UID. No emails, no passwords. Many people have left positive reviews, and Lubar offers 24/7 live support in case you need help with any purchase. You can also top up your Star Rail account in the same way. After making a purchase, Loopbar promises delivery in 30 minutes, but I got my Genesis crystals in just about 5 minutes. They have also proven themselves trustworthy through other creators like Dukaja, Jello Impact, Supera Tom, Mujin, and Tevat Times. So what are you waiting for? Use the link we have put in the description to top up today, and also thanks to Loopbar for sponsoring the video. Now, back to the content.
Now taking a peek over into looking at the weapon banners, first weapon we're going to look at is Verdict. Specifically talking about this weapon, the main stat is crit rate, and at level 90 you're going to get 22.1% crit rate. As normal, we're going to be talking about the refinement ability at refinement 1. It increases attack by 20% flat out, and then when party members obtain elemental shards from the crystallized reactions, the equipping character will gain 1 seal, increasing elemental skill damage by 18%. The seal lasts for 15 seconds, and the equipper may have up to 2 seals at once. All of the equipper's seals will disappear 0.2 seconds after their elemental skill deals damage. This weapon is extremely nice for specifically really only Navia. You could use this on some other characters if you really want to maybe help a little bit more with maybe personal damage for maybe just the crit rate and the attack percent. Mainly you're looking for other Geo characters that are going to be able to use this, especially if they're going to be using skill damage, but most of the other characters you're looking at are really just focusing on burst and normal attack damage, so keep that in mind when looking at maybe putting this on some other characters. A lot of the extra damage that these characters can grab, it's going to be very difficult to do so, but in general, if you can basically allow this ability to be used on anybody else, you could try it, but mainly with this weapon, the only person you're really gunning for is Navia.
Now taking a look at Nilou's weapon, the Key of Khaj-Nisut. This has a base attack of 542 when at level 90, and also gives a main stat of 66.2% HP, which is going to be great for Nilou. Looking at the ability, assuming this is just Refinement 1, it's going to flat out increase your HP by another 20%, and when an elemental skill hits an opponent, you're going to gain the Grand Hymn effect for 20 seconds. This effect increases the equipping character's elemental mastery by 0.12% of their max HP. This effect can trigger once every 0.3 seconds and stacks up to 3 times. When this effect gets to 3 stacks, or when the third stack duration is refreshed, the elemental mastery of all nearby party members is going to be increased by 0.2% of the equipping character's max HP, also for 20 seconds. So obviously this is going to be really, really great for Nilou. We already talked about her first passive. When you use Dendro, Hydro, you're really looking at a Bloom team. and she really enhances those dendro cores and turning them into bountiful cores. So with all of that she's doing for that niche that she provides for and does really well at it, this weapon further specs into that, just increasing her personal elemental mastery, which is going to increase the bloom damage, but also the elemental mastery of all your characters. So your other hydro or dendro characters, if they're the ones creating the bloom, it's also going to be higher damage as well. So obviously a great pick for Nilou. There are a few other characters that can use this weapon pretty well, and the most notable one is actually Kuki Shinobu, just because we know Kuki likes HP, she scales on it for her healing, but she also does like EM because she also uses that for her healing, and she can use it for good damage as well. And whether or not you're using her for an aggravate team or just a hyper bloom team, she can use this weapon very well. Any other characters you want to use this on, as long as they're using the HP, that's really all it comes down to. I know I've mentioned Layla in past videos before, just because Layla's really all Layla is doing is providing a shield that is based on her max HP, and it is a very good shield, probably one of the best shields for a 4-star. So this weapon will help out for that, but don't pull this weapon just for Layla. Trust me.
Going into our last area, talking about the summary and looking at some questions that we need to ask. The first question we're going to ask is, do you need Navia or Nilou on your account? And in terms of like looking at elements and roles on the account that you need of, and specifically with these characters, are you looking for a Geo DPS? Are you kind of lacking in the Geo department? Are you lacking maybe in some Bloom, or maybe just Hydro characters in general on your account? Kind of looking at, do you have any other characters that can really fill the role instead? So first and foremost, looking at, do you need either of these characters? Looking at Navia, she's a great Geo character. In my personal opinion, if you're going to spec into Geo and you haven't yet, Navia is the character to go for. For me, in my personal account, I've not really cared to really go for Geo really at all. Don't have Zhongli, don't care to build Noelle. I just don't care to have a lot of the Geo characters, but Navia I did care for because she kind of opened up using other characters of different elements with using Geo. Other Geo teams are mainly focusing on only using just more and more Geo characters to really buff the team, whereas Navia is just a little bit different, considering she really makes full use out of using other characters that are outside the Geo element. So for me, if you are kind of looking for another DPS, but specifically if you're looking for more Geo on your account, and you're really just kind of extra and you're looking for maybe more Geo, I would say Navia is an extremely good pull to go for. If you're looking for maybe, you know, if you already have some other Geo characters on the account, if for instance you've built your Noelle extremely well, and you have maybe like some of the teammates you would use for Navia, for instance like Farina or something like that, and Bennett, honestly, I would just stick with your extremely well built Noelle. Noelle does really well, and so honestly, all things considered, Noelle can kind of get you to a good part in the, you know, some of the end game. I'm not really sure if you're going to be doing extremely well in like, you know, later parts of the Abyss or whatnot, but she can kind of hold her own in terms of most of the content that the game can provide. Especially with the Imaginarium Theater coming out, having that is going to be nice as well. Navia, on the other hand, she's going to be hitting extremely well and very hard like a truck when using those skill hits. So when you actually start to talk about 12-3 and a lot of the upper levels of endgame, maybe later parts in the Imaginarium Theater, Noelle is not going to be performing as well as someone like Navia. But looking at the other character, at Nilou, is this character really necessary on your account? I would personally say no. A lot of the other Hydro characters in the game can be extremely good. The thing that makes Nilou so well is that if she can be paired with Nahida. Now, pairing her with Nahida is going to give her more elemental mastery and constantly be applying Dendro on enemies so that Nilou can constantly be doing those super bloom core hits. So by doing so, pairing these two together, making an extremely solid team that is extremely good for any type of endgame, it has no problem clearing multiple sides of abysses, and it has probably no issue going through and absolutely destroying the Imaginarium Theater as well. If you're trying to spec a little bit more into maybe Bloom and whatnot, and looking a little bit more into Dendro teams, and specifically if you have Nahida, Nilou is an actual good pull to go for. But if you already have, maybe you're not a fan of, like me personally, I'm not really a fan of looking into going extremely into Bloom with Nilou, then you can probably not go for her as a character. She's not extremely necessary on any account, but if you are looking for and have Nahida, if you're looking to go a little bit farther into the Dendro area, honestly, Nilou is an extremely good pull to go after.
The next question we ask is, what kinds of teams are you trying to build? And Vixen kind of touched on this a little bit already, but with Navia, obviously kind of opening up a little bit more use with other elements with the crystallized reaction and kind of favoring that, typically running Navia with characters like Farina, Yelan, just a lot of your off-fielder of the core 4 elements. When it comes to versatility between Navia and Nilou, Navia definitely has more team options and areas you can just use her, whereas Nilou is a niche character. If you don't have a lot of stuff on your account and you're a lot of vertical and you want to kind of spread out and get new things because you need those new things, like maybe you don't have a pyro DPS, okay? Maybe look for a Hu Tower Arlecchino rerun or even a Linny rerun. I would focus more on getting things like that you need it before looking at a character like Nilou. Navia actually would be one of those characters. So at the end of the day, the grand scheme of things, if you're kind of more of a free-to-play player, I think Navia is a better pull by a pretty big margin too. Just because Nilou, kind of like Vixen also stated, you kind of really want Nahida, and when looking at Nahida, she's an amazing pull already. You should always have Nahida first before going into Nilou anyways. Forget the Bloom team. Nahida is going to add a lot to your account in the first place. So definitely pick up a Nahida somewhere down the line before even looking at Nilou, in my personal opinion. Now, can Nilou work without Nahida? Yes, but the caveat to that is you're using a lot of other Dendro options. Like, you'll probably want to use Alhaitham as an on-field just to get the application. You could also use Kaveh, who does kind of focus around Bloom teams anyway, but that's the catch. If you don't have those things, if you don't have your Kaveh built, let alone if you even have him because Hoyoverse forgot about him, or if you don't have Alhaitham, then it becomes very difficult to make a Nilou team work very well. Now, the team is still very good. Just know that that kind of a team revolves more around the application than it does the personal damage of the characters. Not saying that the personal damage of the characters doesn't matter. Like, if you're using Yelan, obviously that does matter and it is helping buff your on-fielder and whatnot, but you want to apply Dendro and Hydro as much as possible. And when you don't have Nahida, it is a little bit of a stumbling block. So pick up Nahida first before Nilou, in my opinion, and Navia, that just makes Navia the better pull. And Navia is a lot more universal. She can be used with a lot of those different characters. Farina is definitely a character you shouldn't skip. And she's a great teammate for Navia. If you already have Farina, maybe Navia is something you want to go for. If you don't have a lot of Geo filled on your account, maybe you don't have Zhongli, maybe you pulled Chiori, I don't know. But if you have Ito, it's kind of like, if you're at the veteran stage of the game, then yeah, go for Navia. So when it comes to team options, like I said, Navia with maybe another Geo just to get the Geo resonance, like Zhongli is an okay option. You could also just use Chiori is going to be okay. You want to get the Geo resonance because the Geo resonance is actually pretty powerful. But then make sure you're using two different of the core four, like maybe Farina and then Bennett, or Yelan and Bennett. And if you don't have Farina or you don't even have Bennett, I mean, hey, Beidou can work. Xingqiu, Xiangling, as long as you're getting that off-field application, that's really what Navia wants to get the Crystallize going as fast as possible. You could also use Yunjin for your Geo Resonance as well.
Looking at the next question we have, it's do you need either of the weapons? First and foremost, looking at Verdict, although it does have a lower amount of crit rate, like I already kind of talked about when talking about the weapon, it's extremely only useful for really Navia. You're not going to really put this on anybody else, unless you're just looking for a stat stick for the main stat and the high base attack, and the attack percent and the ability. But the rest of the ability doesn't really help you at all for really most other characters. Navia is going to do extremely well with this weapon. There are other weapons that Navia can use, so if you have Navia and you're thinking, do I actually need the weapon? My personal opinion, I would heavily consider going after the weapon because it just fully completes her kit. But, you know, there are other weapons that have worked. For instance, Stone Thresher is a good weapon that I know works in general for the character just because of the stat stick. And I'm sure there are some other weapons that are pretty good as well, you know, Serpent Spine and whatnot. So looking in general at Verdict, it's a very good weapon only for Navia. And if you do have Navia, it vastly increases the idea of getting that weapon. But honestly, it's really not necessary if you don't have Navia. Looking at the key of Khaj-Nisut, obviously if you have Nilou, this is a very good idea to go after for this weapon, but things like Iron Sting and some Elemental Mastery weapons can do extremely well with this weapon as well, you know, instead of the weapon. So if you really are looking for this weapon for specifically a Nilou, it has some good pull factor, not as much as Verdict does for Navia, but it has some pretty good pull factor. But honestly, Nilou can survive without her personal 5-star weapon, whereas Navia is a little bit more dependent on having her weapon. But with the key of Khaj-Nisut, looking at other, you know, units as well, if you have Navia, you go after Verdict and you get key of Khaj-Nisut, don't be sad. If you can grab a Kuki, or if you already have Kuki built, this is an extremely good weapon on Kuki. So if you do happen to just drop key of Khaj-Nisut, if you just happen to drop key of Khaj-Nisut by accident, it's not that bad of a weapon. Go ahead and throw it on your Kuki. Your Kuki is going to love it and actually do extremely well because of it.
And I am going to mention this just because I failed to mention it when I originally was talking about key of Khaj-Nisut, and I know someone's going to bring it up in the comments if I don't. but you can technically use Key of Khaj-Nisut even on Farina, just because Farina really loves the HP. The issue is that you're just losing a lot of crit. And I've seen people talk about, well, when you do get to the C6 Farina or something like that, that this weapon's actually can potentially be better in certain scenarios. I have seen that out there. I just wanted to mention you can actually use it there if you wanted to, and you're getting crit from other sources. Maybe you're doing Marshazé or something like that, which I wouldn't recommend unless you are C6. But I just wanted to state that because I know someone's going to bring it up. But moving on to the next section, we're going to quickly weigh some of the dangers between free-to-play perspective, veteran perspective, and even whale like points of views. And these questions right here talking about the constellations are going to be for people who just generally want help on whether or not you should pull multiple copies of the character. And at the end of the day, just know that your Primogems are your Primogems, and you get to do with them what you like. So the first question is, are these characters worth at C0? And with Navia, I think definitely is worth at C0, and I think Vixen, you would agree with me on that, just because, like you stated earlier, and we've seen at this point in time, Navia just hits hard. She has really high multipliers, she has a lot of different team options, she's very easy to use, and pretty free-to-play friendly because of all of those things. She doesn't really need her first few constellations to be considered good. They're just not necessary. You will be able to clear the endgame content with a C0 Navia, and she's very fun to use. Now with Nilou, actually it's the same thing. You don't need constellations for Nilou. Now Nilou does have a very, very powerful C2, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, but Nilou is one of those characters where you don't need multiple copies of. Just get one copy of her if that's what you're looking for, and she's going to make a Bloom team incredible. Now, talking about those C1 and the C2, if you do want to get multiple copies, Vixen, what are some things you might be able to share with Navia?
Well, looking at Navia specifically for Constellations like you were talking about, I do have her C0 R1, and honestly, like you talked about, the C0 version of her is going to do extremely well for you. But if you are thinking, well, I already kind of want to go for some Constellations, the first two is really what we normally look at. So looking at the first Constellation, it states that each stack of Crystal Shrapnel consumed when Navia uses her skill will restore 3 energy to her and decrease the cooldown of her burst by 1 second. And you can get up to 9 energy this way, and the cooldown can be decreased up to 3 seconds. So it kind of allows you a little bit more to turn your cooldown from 15 seconds on the burst down to 12. And you can get an extra 9 energy this way, and considering the energy cost is only a 60 for her burst, it's going to be extremely nice to be down to basically a 50 energy cost at the end of the day when you have the C1. It is a nice extra little boost. It helps a little bit more with energy, and it helps a little bit more with a cooldown on your burst. Now, what this specifically can mean though for you, just remember in the burst, you can get stacks of those crystal shrapnels when the cannon attacks hit opponents. And honestly, I really want to bring that up because the C2, in my personal opinion, is better than the C1. But that burst extra help in the C1 is nice because looking at that, it helps you get more stacks of those crystal shrapnel, which makes you do more damage when you actually use your skill. So talking about that though, looking between the difference between can you stop at C1 or is it better to go for C2? My personal opinion, the C1 is nice, but I would state that it is better to push a little bit further to get the C2. Looking at the C2, it states that each stack of Crystal Shrapnel consumed will increase the crit rate of the skill instance by 12%. The crit rate can be increased up to a 36% in this way. So you can get up to 3 stacks of this, getting up to 36% crit rate. Now, I did talk about with Navia, having a very high crit rate is extremely good. For instance, me myself, I usually like to have an extremely high crit damage with an okay amount of crit. But here I actually have a very high crit rate on her. It's in the 90s just because of how well it is to be constantly critting on those skill hits. Yes, you have 2 charges, but honestly, you always want to make sure that you're constantly critting on those big hits because it helps so much just with the overall damage from what you're hitting. In the C2, it also states, in addition, when the skill hits an opponent, one cannon fire support from the burst will strike nearby location of the hit that you do. And up to 1 instance of this cannon fire support can be triggered each time the skill is used. And the damage dealt by the cannon fire support this way is considered elemental burst damage. What that means is then you're adding even more crystal shrapnel stacks on top of what you already have. So this basically just helps you even more get more stacks for your skill usages. So after you use your skill, it gives you another stack basically by sending another burst hit basically to hit an opponent if it does hit an opponent like it talks about in the burst. So like I said, getting the extra 36% crit rate from the C2 is, like I said, extremely good. This allows you to go a little bit more into crit damage and whatnot, maybe some attack in your substats, while allowing this kind of crit rate from the C2 to kind of buff you more. And then the C2 also just helping you get stacks even quicker. just kind of like how the C1 does. The C2 just fully, in my personal opinion, kind of almost fully completes her kit.
Quickly going over Nilou's constellations, her first one just states that her skill is going to be enhanced as follows. The luminous illusion damage is going to be increased by 65%, which is talking about when you do the skill and then follow up with normal attacks and kind of use her on field, where she gets the Hydro Infusion. And then also the Tranquility Aura's duration is going to be extended by 6 seconds, which is when you use the skill version 3 times in succession and you can go off field with her. So it is kind of nice. In my opinion, it's more of a quality of life. The extra damage you're getting on those luminous illusion isn't, in my opinion, that great, because with Nilou being a bloom support, you don't have to even spec into building her as a Hydra DPS, especially if you have a character like Nervalette, Child, or Ayato. It's really just not worth it. Now, you can do it, and it works very well, and the C1's going to help a lot of that damage go up by 65%. But when you're using her as a bloom support, and I'll just let you guys know, I have all 3 of her talents at level 1, and I do that to make a point because she doesn't need that stuff. She's in the team for her first passive. So that really, in my opinion, brings down the C1's value overall because it's just not that game changing. And yes, the duration of the Tranquility Aura being extended by 6 seconds is nice, but once again, not necessary. If you have the good team for her, and if you have Nahida, like I stated earlier in the video, having Nahida first because she's more important to have and really necessary for a Nilou team just for the application. And if you're using the team right, you really won't need the extra 6 seconds in your rotations. So this brings me to her Constellation 2, and as I mentioned before, it's a really good one, and here's why. After characters affected by the Golden Chalice's bounty from her first passive talent, when they deal Hydro damage to an opponent, that opponent's Hydro resistance will be decreased by 35% for 10 seconds. Also, after a triggered Bloom reaction deals damage to opponents, their Dendro resistance will be decreased by 35% for 10 seconds. And also, obviously, you need to have unlocked the Court of Dancing Petals talent. So, by decreasing both Hydro and Dendro resistance on the enemies by 35% for 10 seconds, that is a big deal, especially with the Dendro res decrease, because all of those bountiful core damage is going to go up by a pretty big margin. And if you do have a lot of good Hydro damage in the team, which is pretty easy with characters like Farina, Yelan, and even Nilou herself, if that's what you want to go into and you actually do want to level and use her on field with her talents and stuff, this constellation is just really good to increase the overall team damage for the Bloom team. Now, does she need it? No, because she's really good at C0 and really is just about opening up your account to a new kind of niche team being Bloom. Well, we hope that this video could help you decide on whether these characters or even the weapons coming up on this next banner are for you.
As always, if you have any suggestions that may help other players, go ahead and let us know down in the comments. Make sure to like, subscribe, and check out our Discord as well. Thank you again for watching the video, and we'll see you in the next one.